Welcome back. Good Monday morning, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us this Monday. I'm Maria Bartiromo, and it is Monday, May 7th. Your top stories right now, 7 a.m. on the East Coast, poised for gains. Futures indicating a higher opening for the broader averages. We are now at the high of the morning. Check this out. Dow Industrial is expected to be up about 70 points, 1/3%. The NASDAQ is up 40 points right now, 2/3%. This on top of a pretty good rally on Friday. It was a wild day on Wall Street after that April jobs report. When all was said and done, the market was up 330 points. That was 1/3%. The NASDAQ was up 1.75%. Brian Brenberg predicted it on Friday right here. Global markets this morning looking like this. In Europe, slight gains. As you see, the market in London is closed for a holiday this morning, but the DAX index in Germany is up 0.5%. And the CAC 40 is up just a fraction, in positive territory, though, in France. In Asia, overnight markets were mostly higher, with the exception of Japan. Korea was closed for a holiday, and the Shanghai Composite in China, that was up 1.5%. We're watching oil prices this morning. Crude oil is now at the highest level since 2014. Up to $70.38 a barrel. This amid protests in Iran, along with the looming deadline over the nuclear deal. The president has until May 12th, this week, to decide whether or not to pull out of the Iran deal. Congress gets back to work this week. Lawmakers are returning to Washington with a lot on their plate, all ahead of the midterm elections. Here's what House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy told me yesterday on Sunday Morning Futures about the possibility of Speaker Pelosi.
It's probably one of the scariest things I've heard all week, because picture it come November 9th, waking up, if the Democrats controlled the House, and Nancy giving this congratulatory speech and becoming Speaker.
We will tell you why that was the scariest thing he'd ever look at coming up. Meanwhile, a closer look at that. Meanwhile, a scare on the tarmac, a Southwest jet and a truck collide. We have the details coming up. Bank of America is backtracking. The lender says it will now provide financing for gunmaker Remington Outdoor, initially pulling back out of that. An unbelievable scene on a Carnival cruise ship. Look at this. Water flooding the hallways, reminding some passengers of the Titanic. What was behind the flood? Coming up. Plus, a painful moment for one baseball player, a pitch to the groin, putting him on the bench for a month. Ouch. All that coming up this morning. Joining us to talk all about it, Fox News contributor Katherine Timpf is here. The King's College professor and business and economics, Brian Brenberg, is here. And the PwC partner, Mitch Roschelle. Great to see you.
We have to go right after the...
I know that leading story was kind of tough.
That wasn't good. That's
a month on the bench, huh?
Oh, man.
Yeah, and how about the water on the ship? That does remind you of the Titanic.
They were all playing and laughing in it. I would not have been so chill. No way.
Really important conversation, I thought, with Mark Penn and Mark Lauder this morning, talking about what's taking place at the Department of Justice and this pushback between the Oversight Committee and the Intel Committee and the Department of Justice, Brian.
Well, and these continued important conversations about scope. I mean, this is so basic to this conversation. What are we here to do? Federal judge down in Virginia saying, come on, people, let's figure out what we're about here and stick to the script. One of the problems, of course, as you pointed out, is we don't even know what the script is. We don't know what the scope of this thing is because it hasn't been revealed.
Initially, Robert Mueller said that his investigation was about potential collusion between the Trump administration and Russia. And then he started talking about obstruction. And then somewhere along the lines, he was given the right to expand the scope of the investigation. Now, this judge wants to see the scope. The scope memo. What is it? They don't want to give it up.
And he wants to see it because he's wondering why we're talking about bank fraud allegations from 2005 and we're supposed to be talking about Russia
And he makes the point that, let's face it, let's be honest, you just bring your Paul Manafort in to get information about Donald Trump because your end goal here is to take down Donald Trump.
That's very clear that that's what this is about at this point. I mean, at first you could say it's about the integrity of our elections, and I'm all for that. But when it just comes to taking down Donald Trump for the sake of taking down Donald Trump, I don't even appreciate my tax dollars being spent on that.
Yeah, thank you. Coming up this morning, joining the conversation, the CEO of Oracle is here. Mark Hurd will join us, give us a window into how business is going. Former White House press secretary under George W. Bush, Ari Fleischer, is here, along with former finance minister of Greece, Yanis Varoufakis, is here, and Fox News senior judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano. We will talk all of that coming up. Don't miss a moment of it. But first, our top story right now, back to business on Capitol Hill. House Republicans are returning to work today after a week-long recess to face an intra-party fight over the sweeping $867 billion farm bill, which includes funding for food stamps. The White House is expected to send the House a proposal to cut roughly $11 billion from old spending accounts using a method known as rescission today as well. Joining us to weigh in is the member of the House Foreign Relations and Judiciary Committees, Party's House Freedom Caucus member as well, Congressman Ron DeSantis of Florida. Congressman, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning, Maria.
Lot to cover this morning. First to the Farm Bill. You support it?
I think that there's questions. I mean, look, this is a massive spending bill. I think there are some good faith efforts to reform some of this. The problem, though, Maria, is if you pass that out of the House with Republican votes, what happens in the Senate is they put all the other stuff back in there, and then an $867 billion bill ends up a $1 trillion bill. And so I think a lot of us on the conservative side who want less spending are just looking over at the U.S. Senate, and we've seen this game time and time again. There's some conservative reforms passed out of the House, and then the ultimate package is the same old song and dance year after year.
So you want to see some change before you'll actually buy into this?
That's right.
What do you want to see? How might it change?
Well, I want to see that whatever reforms will stick through the whole process,
right,
rather than just creating a vehicle that ends up getting the same old bill. Remember, last time in 2013, the bill was $1 trillion, and it actually was more expensive than they initially forecast with some of the farm programs. So we've got to protect taxpayers in all this, Maria, and those are the people that typically get lost in these big food fights.
Yes, exactly. This comes ahead of a big race tomorrow. Voters headed to the polls in Indiana, Ohio, West Virginia, North Carolina. President Trump was tweeting about the West Virginia race as well. Here's what he wrote. To the great people of West Virginia, we have together a really great chance to keep making a big difference. Problem is, Don Blankenship, currently running for Senate, cannot win the general election in your state. No way. Remember Alabama. Vote Representative Jenkins or A.G. Morrissey. This comes, of course, ahead of the midterm elections this November. House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi recently said Democrats will win the House and she will run for Speaker. I asked that to Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy, who was expecting to be Speaker, yesterday on Sunday Morning Futures. Listen to this, Congressman.
It's probably one of the scariest things I've heard all week, because picture it come November 9th, waking up, if the Democrats controlled the House, and Nancy giving this congratulatory speech and becoming Speaker. What we had just transpired in the last year will all be reversed.
Congressman, your reaction.
Well, what Nancy would do is she would want to raise taxes, which would obviously hurt the economic progress we've made, and they would want to continue to allow pretty much unfettered illegal immigration. That's a position that their party has gravitated towards now. And they would do nonstop investigations of the Trump administration. I do think that they would move to try to impeach the president. On what? I have no idea, but I've seen them issue those try to force votes on those resolutions this year in the Congress, trying to impeach him over things like his tweeting or him criticizing the NFL players for kneeling. I mean, it's preposterous, but I think that's what they're looking at. So the American people need to ask, okay, do you want a majority that is intent on actually focusing on the kitchen table issues, which I think the Republicans would, or do you want to go off in this leftward veer with somebody like Nancy Pelosi, who you've already seen her in action for 4 years, and you overwhelmingly rejected her leadership in 2010. So I think that's a pretty clear choice.
All right. Well, that's an interesting point that you make, because I was speaking with Mark Penn and Mark Lotter about what took place between the Department of Justice and Devin Nunes, the chairman of the Intel Committee, over the weekend. And I want to get your take on this, because now on Friday you have this judge pushing back, T.S. Ellis, saying, what is the scope of this investigation? And we're not understanding fully what Robert Mueller's scope is, in fact. Has it been expanded?
Well, that's been the problem from day one, Maria. Rod Rosenstein, when he appointed Mueller, he didn't clearly delineate what was supposed to be investigated. He didn't identify a specific crime. It was basically just do a counterintelligence investigation and turn it into a criminal investigation, which basically means you're just trying to find any crime you can. And that's not the way these things are supposed to be going. I think what the judge said was exactly right. I think that Rosenstein has refused to rein in Mueller, which he should have done. And then you also have the judge on Saturday, Maria, where, remember, the only case involving the presidential campaign has nothing to do with Donald Trump or his campaign, but they did indict several of these Russian companies for doing the bots and the social media. Well, one of those companies has attorneys, and they want to actually contest the charges, and Mueller is not ready to bring the case. He asked for a delay, and the judge said, no, you need to come bring this case. So this seems to be falling apart. There's no basis for the collusion even after a full year of Mueller, and then, of course, a lot of Comey before then. So I think it's time to put up or shut up. I've been saying that for a long time.
Yeah.
This is not good for the country. And to just say we're going to try to do anything to bring down the president, that's not the way this is supposed to operate.
It's interesting that Devin Nunes is pursuing contempt of Congress charges against Jeff Sessions, but not Rod Rosenstein, because basically he says Rod Rosenstein shouldn't be involved in any of this at all, because he's conflicted because he put his signature on the FISA warrant, the last FISA warrant renewal, which allowed them to wiretap and listen into Carter Page, and it was all based on the dossier.
He signed a FISA warrant, 100% true, and he's the one that wrote the memo saying that Comey should be fired. So he should have been recused from the whole Mueller thing. He should not have been the one to make that determination. So I am 100% in agreement. I think Rosenstein should have recused himself, should have never been involved in any of this. And the fact that he has been involved with the FISA application and yet he has stonewalled Congress, that is a really bad look for the Justice Department, and it looks like they're just trying to keep the truth from the American public. And remember, Rosenstein has said, oh, you can't do a Nunes memo. It's going to be terrible for national security. They were making all these claims, yet the memo was declassified. There was no damage to national security, Maria. It was very informative of the public about the conduct of his department, but it didn't expose any sources and methods. So they've cried wolf time and time again on this.
What I don't understand is why the Justice Department would be hiding anything. I mean, at this point, we all know what took place during the 2016 election between Jim Comey and Andrew McCabe, and then you got Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. By the way, we should point out Lisa Page resigned. She resigned from the FBI on Friday. So we know that there was all this bias. Wouldn't the Department of Justice want to get truth out? Who are they protecting?
Well, if you look at some of the things that they have produced and the redactions that they'll have, there really isn't a national security reason to do some of the redactions. A lot of the redactions are done to protect people like Comey. And I just think it's in Washington, bureaucracies tend to defend themselves, and they're more interested in doing that than in getting the facts to the American people. That's why I think Nunes has been right to say with either Rosenstein or Sessions, look, there needs to be consequences for your noncompliance. And if we go back and do the song and dance, oh, please give us the documents, please do this, you're going to end up in the situation we've had. If you say we'll hold you in contempt, or you say we even bring an impeachment article against you, well, then that's the point where I think these people would have to listen and finally put up or shut up. But if we don't get the documents soon, my fear is that you get into the summer, then the election season, and you end up delaying it past the fall campaign. And I think that would be a disaster. Well, the American people need the answers now.
Which is why the president tweeted suggestions recently that he's going to have to use his presidential power, which means he will declassify all of this stuff. He can do that.
He should, and I think his advisors have said, look, they're going to say you're interfering with Mueller if you do this or that. I think that ship has sailed at that point. I think people realize Mueller doesn't have the collusion goods. He's basically trying to build an obstruction case, which I think is absurd on its face. So I think the president should do that. I think it would be a blow for transparency, and it would help the American people make sense of how these very high people in the bureaucracy conducted their affairs. Remember, the Nunes... the start of the investigation for collusion was Peter Strzok, based off 2 pages with no intelligence. And he opens up a collusion investigation.
Devin Nunes told us that. No intelligence at all. Real quick, will the president pull out of the Iran deal, you think? The deadline's this week.
I think he should. It's a bad deal.
Congressman, good to see you, sir.
Thanks.
Thanks so much. Congressman Ron DeSantis there. A scare on the tarmac. We will tell you about it next. Welcome back. The president is tweeting this morning about the CIA director nominee. He says, my highly respected nominee for CIA director, Gina Haspel, has come under fire because she was too tough on terrorists. Think of that. In these very dangerous times, we have the most qualified person, a woman, who Democrats want out because she's too tough on terror. Win Gina. President just tweeting that about Gina Haspel. Another incident, meanwhile, involving a Southwest Airlines plane this morning to tell you about. Cheryl Casone has headlines now. Cheryl.
Yeah, Maria, the airline can't catch a break, it seems. This happened just after midnight. Flight 6263 had arrived in Baltimore Washington International from Fort Lauderdale. As the plane was pulling into the gate, a pickup truck hit it and became stuck underneath. Nobody was hurt, but passengers say they were stuck on the plane for an additional 2 hours. Just last week, a window cracked on a flight, causing an emergency landing. And last month, an engine explosion caused debris to break a window, partially sucking a passenger outside of the aircraft. Shares of Southwest are down about 19% for the year. Well, Bank of America apparently testing a pledge it made just a few weeks ago to stop loaning money to companies that make assault weapons. The bank saying it's going to help provide financing to Remington Outdoor, which plans to exit bankruptcy later this month. B of A, one of 7 banks taking part in this nearly $200 million loan. Remington makes the Bushmaster rifle, which was used in the Sandy Hook school shooting in Connecticut back in 2012. Bank says it agreed to replace the company's credit facility before it adopted its new policy on financing makers of assault weapons. Bank of America shares are slightly higher in the pre-market. Well, an Alabama boy coming back to life, literally, after his parents had already pledged to donate his organs. 13-year-old Trenton McKinley was being pulled in a cart. It flipped over. He landed on his head, so it was a freak accident for the young boy. Doctors told his parents that his survival was unlikely, and 5 other children could be helped with his organs. The day before doctors were ready to literally pull the plug, Trent started showing signs of improvement. He says that he even went to heaven before being brought back to earth. He is now on the road to recovery. Incredible. And finally, there's this. How fast do you think you could solve Rubik's Cube? Check this out. A 22-year-old man in Australia set a new world record, solved the puzzle in a stunning 4.22 seconds. Happened over the weekend at a competition in Melbourne, breaking the previous world record of 4.59 seconds, okay? The new record holder is known as a super cuber. Fast fingers, Maria. Lord. How about I've solved that puzzle never?
I've never done it. Not once.
I can get a side. I can definitely do a side.
That's hard.
That's incredible. No, I can't even tie my shoes that fast.
Thanks, Cheryl. Coming up, a new warning from NASA. The agency now says SpaceX rocket technology could put lives at risk. This as the company prepares for another launch today. We'll talk with Vector co-founder and CEO Jim Cantrell about the space race next. And then now you can party like a royal wedding guest, even if you didn't get an invite, where you can check out the Royal Wedding Pub next. Back in a minute. The 3-2-1 liftoff. That was SpaceX's historic launch of the Falcon Heavy rocket back in February. The aerospace company slated for another rocket launch later today. This coming as NASA safety advisors are reportedly concerned that SpaceX's method for loading fuel could put lives at risk, according to the Washington Post. With privatized space travel gaining more steam, our next guest wants to churn out rockets with the same speed the auto industry churns out cars. Joining us right now is the CEO and co-founder of Vector, Jim Cantrell. Jim is also a member of the founding team of SpaceX. You are the co-founder there. Great to see you, Jim. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. What's your takes on this space race?
Yeah, so it's really we've changed from nation-state space to private space, and slowly the government domination of the industry is moving away to that of entrepreneurs who are rightfully taking the place in this part of high technology.
And is that a good thing? It's
a good thing in my view. We lower costs. Elon and SpaceX have lowered the cost of building these rockets by at least 50 times what the government's done. And in order for the innovation to occur, it has to really go to the private sector. Can you imagine the government making iPhones, for example, today?
No. Yeah, good point.
Is there any way for NASA to do something commercial, or are they just completely frozen out because SpaceX and others are really taking over the commercial space?
Good question, but it's really a question of what NASA's rightful role is, and they're a user of space. They're not necessarily a developer of rockets and spacecraft anymore. And so we see them as the commercialization goes forward, just like they use Mac computers and iPhones. They'll be using Vector rockets, and they already use SpaceX rockets.
So, Jim, you look at like Bezos, or you look at Elon Musk, and they're kind of all about saving, when we destroy planet Earth, we're going to have these colonies ready for you. I mean, these big, grand sort of schemes. And Richard Branson's all about providing space tourism for the wealthy. You take a very different approach. You're not thinking about that kind of stuff. You're thinking about how do we build the Model T of rockets, essentially.
Right. Yeah, when Elon approached me back in 2001, it was all about Mars, going to Mars, and building rockets was always about going to Mars. It still is. I'm different in the sense that I'm about making money. I want to transform the space economy like elevators did to the New York skyline. It raised the skyline here, raised the economy, raised all of the real estate in New York City. So we're going to build rockets at a rate that we can actually make them reliable. And the only way to do that is to emulate the automotive industry, who's actually made very sophisticated devices called cars at very low cost.
Familiar.
Yeah. So you think that there's, I mean, what are they going to do? Go there, and then what do we know about space in order to explore more?
Well, so there's always sort of the basic human yearning to see what's around the next corner, and I think that's really what drives Bezos and Elon and some of these guys is to go to Mars. Me, I'm motivated by making a dollar and making the economy a little bit better.
But it's interesting because, this past week we were talking about Elon Musk and Tesla, and, you're talking about making cars. They're having a hard time making cars, but he's talking about going to space. And so is there just this gap in terms of the expectation about what we want to do and what's actually feasible? And do we need to start thinking more like, look, Henry Ford, Model T, let's just get something on the road?
Yeah, that's exactly the point Vector is at, where we're actually making the simplest possible rocket in the smallest possible size so we can make them in the maximum possible numbers. We get the benefits of cost reduction plus reliability. So we think that that's what we can do to turn space travel from a bespoke industry into something more like an airline transport industry where it goes every day.
And it says you're doing it at 1/20th of the price, so your payload's considerably smaller than what their payload would be?
Correct. We're focused on microsatellites, which are anywhere from the size of a loaf of bread to the size of an HP printer, for example. And they weigh a few hundred pounds down to a few pounds themselves.
And they're used for?
So commercial communications and then Earth observation are the primary uses right now.
And what do you think this looks like in 5 years?
So Morgan Stanley predicts this is $1 trillion economy in about 10 years. So I think we'll be close to that in 5. It's growing exponentially underneath everybody's nose. And this is one of the great places where venture capital is being invested right now. There was over $1 billion invested last year in this area.
That is incredible. Jim, thanks so much.
Go to
Thank you.
Yeah. People want to go to space.
Yeah, I kind of do.
Yeah.
Well, the curiosity of what's around the corner, you're right. It's true. Good to see you, Jim. Thank you so much, Jim Cantrell there. Coming up, bringing the Woodstock of capitalism back to Omaha. Liz Clayman is sitting down with Warren Buffett at the Berkshire Hathaway shareholders meeting. She brings us the latest from Omaha after the meeting this weekend. Then a Carnival cruise scare. Passengers aboard the Dream Ship forced to head home after a nightmare water main break. Forced hallways and flooded hallways and rooms with water. We have the harrowing pictures coming up. Stay with us. Welcome back. Good Monday morning, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Maria Bartiromo, and it is Monday, May 7th. Your top stories right now, 7:30 a.m. on the East Coast. Poised for gains. Futures indicating a higher opening for the broader averages. This is the high of the morning right here. Dow Industrial's up 82 points right now. That's 1/3%. S&P is up 1/3% as well. And the NASDAQ, it's up 42 points. That's 2/3%. Extending the rally of Friday. It was a wild day on Friday after the April jobs report. Markets started off lower, but gained momentum throughout the session and finished up 332 points, 1.33% this morning. Global markets are fractionally better on the session. The market is closed in London for a holiday, but the CAC 40 in Paris is up a fraction, and the DAX index in Germany is up 0.5%. Tyson Foods hitting the tape right now, revenue missing expectations, earnings still a driver in this market. In Asia overnight, markets closed mostly higher. As you can see, Korea was closed for a holiday. Shanghai Composite in China, best performer, up 1.5%. Contempt of Congress, that's the threat against Attorney General Jeff Sessions over the Justice Department not complying with a subpoena. The DOJ is firing back this morning. Here's what House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy told me yesterday on Sunday Morning Futures about holding the Justice Department accountable.
The view is we will not stop because we are separate but co-equal, and we will take every process that we have in the power to get the information that we have a right and responsibility to see.
President Trump is tweeting this morning. Here's what he says. The Russia witch hunt is rapidly losing credibility. House Intelligence Committee found no collusion, no coordination or anything else with Russia. So now the probe says, okay, what else is there? How about obstruction for a made-up phony crime? There is no obstruction. It's called fighting back. An unbelievable scene on a Carnival cruise ship. Water flooding the hallways, reminding some passengers of the Titanic. What was behind that flood? Coming up. And a painful pitch, ouch, an MLB catcher taking a 100-mile-an-hour fastball right to the groin. We're going to tell you about that. He is now out for a month. An update on his condition this morning. Celebrating the royal wedding without heading across the pond. Find out where you can toast to Prince Harry and Meghan Markle next week ahead of their wedding. Plus, a new look at Prince Louis. Kensington Palace releasing new photos of the prince, both Prince Louis and Princess Charlotte, both wearing hand-me-downs. Great pictures there. All of that coming up this morning. But first, there's this. The Berkshire Hathaway shareholder meeting happened over the weekend. Warren Buffett among the top shareholders of Wells Fargo. Last week, I spoke exclusively with CEO Tim Sloan and asked him what the company is doing to repair its relationship with customers.
We need to rebuild trust with our stakeholders. So how do we do that? We make sure that if there's anything that we did that was improper with a customer, that we make it right by them, that we fix anything that needs to be fixed at the company, and then we focus on going forward, and that's building a better Wells Fargo, and we're doing that every day.
Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway, the #1 shareholder in Wells Fargo. Liz Clayman is at the Berkshire Hathaway meeting today and over the weekend. She's in Omaha, Nebraska. She caught up with Warren Buffett to get his reaction. Liz, good morning to you. How was the meeting?
I'll tell you something, Maria. It was fascinating this time around. This is our 10th here at Fox Business, where we have this exclusive access. Right now, I just want to let you know we are in Warren Buffett's headquarters lobby. We're the only business network that is invited in after the meeting and certainly before the board meeting of directors, which will happen this morning. So we're going to get you all of that. But I have to tell you that what people heard from the meeting, and there's this huge crush of people, Warren had said that it would be a record. You can see some of these people as they gathered around him, some 40, maybe 42,000 people who descended upon Omaha, Nebraska for this annual shareholder meeting. A lot of them wanted to know precisely what you just showed. What about Wells Fargo? This is a stock that actually ended up in an accounting trickery thing that happened because it's just a new accounting rule, brought Berkshire earnings to a loss here because of Wells Fargo stock not doing well and all of the scandals. Friday, you know, Wells Fargo had yet another settlement it had to pay out in a class action shareholder lawsuit. The biggest of the shareholders, Warren Buffett. I had a chance to specifically ask him, at what point do you look at Wells Fargo and say, what's going on? Here's what he said.
Wells Fargo had the wrong incentives. And unfortunately, incentives work, so if you got the wrong ones, they work in the wrong way. And the big problem was they didn't do something about it.
We just remember when you were at Solomon and you had to fix problems, right, and you said, hurt the brand and I will be ruthless. Would you have allowed at Solomon that many mistakes to continue after the original one was discovered?
Well, I was worried sick when the original one was discovered that there were a whole bunch more.
But you're holding on to Wells Fargo for the foreseeable future.
We'll make a lot of money in Wells Fargo. We have already made a lot of money. And we've probably got well over a $10 billion profit in Wells Fargo.
How about that, Maria? $10 billion profit coming up 3 p.m. Eastern. right here. I've got Warren Buffett, but I'm going to talk to him about a whole bunch of issues, all that's happening. What are sort of the black swans that we may face? We're days away from President Trump possibly deciding to pull out of the nuclear deal with Iran. What would that do to the markets? We'll talk to him about that. And his vice chair, Charlie Munger, who made big headlines on Bitcoin. He equated trading Bitcoin to trading, this is his quote, turds. We're going to talk to him about that much more. But these two, in their 80s and 90s, are still in it to win it. It's unbelievable. We'll see you at 3 p.m.
incredible.
Eastern.
And I know, Liz, one big headline from the meeting that you were at this weekend was that he bought more Apple. And he continues to make money on Apple stock. For a long time, he wasn't a growth investor in tech. But once he figured it out, he went knee-deep in tech.
Guess what? He said he doesn't view Apple as tech. He views it as a consumer products business.
Well,
so
I
pushed him on that. Okay. I said, what happens there? You know, I mean, what if they are outdone by some other company? He said, well, call me when it happens.
Great stuff. Liz, we're looking forward to your interview at 3 p.m. on your program here on Fox Business. Thank you so much, Liz. We'll see you back at the ranch when you come home. Liz Clayman is in Omaha this weekend, and join her live today, 3 p.m. Eastern, for her interview with Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. First, though, this House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes doubling down on Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Congressman Nunes outlined the potential consequences if Sessions does not comply with the subpoena investigating alleged surveillance abuses at the Justice Department. He called into Fox and Friends yesterday, basically saying he is ready to pursue the contempt of Congress charges. And then right after that, I had House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy on Sunday Morning Futures, and I asked him to weigh in as well.
2 weeks ago, we sent a letter to Attorney General Jeff Sessions, a classified letter. Per usual, it was ignored, not acknowledged, just completely ignored. So last week, we sent a subpoena, and then on Thursday, we discovered that they are not going to comply with our subpoena. The only thing left that we can do is we have to move quickly to hold the Attorney General of the United States in contempt.
Every time they have stonewalled us, we have not given up. And when we did get the information, it was very interesting how the information would come forward, that people would then start resigning or quitting from these organizations based upon the action that they took place.
Now, the Justice Department fired back, saying that it informed Nunes that providing the information could pose grave implications for national security. That's according to the letter obtained by Fox News, that letter of Thursday saying, we're not going to comply with this because it's national security issues. Joining us right now, Fox News senior judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano. Judge, good to see you.
Good morning. I'm still chuckling at the ease with which Warren Buffett can say, yeah, we made it $10 billion.
Yeah, right. Another day at the office.
Unbelievable. Right.
So what about this,
Well,
Judge?
this is a little bit more complicated than it appears at first blush. The Justice Department will probably, and I'm not defending what they do, but to explain it, will probably take the position that the documents that are sought are about an ongoing criminal investigation. Now, who wrote the laws that says you can keep secret documents about an ongoing criminal investigation? The Congress. So if the Congress wants to change that law, they can change it. They haven't. Now, if I receive a subpoena for something that I think is secret, I can't basically say to the sender of the subpoena, go take a hike. I have to take the subpoena to a federal judge and ask the federal judge to quash it. That's just the phrase we use to eradicate it. And then the federal judge will look at the documents and decide if they are privileged as I claim. The Justice Department doesn't do that. The Justice Department basically says, go take a hike. If you want to enforce the subpoena, you know how to enforce it. So I don't know where this is going to go. The Justice Department gets burned, it believes, when the progress of an ongoing criminal investigation is exposed for political reasons. On the other hand, the Congress is the regulator of the Justice Department, has the right to see nearly everything. I say nearly everything because Congress wrote the laws that says there are certain things nobody can see, like the progress of a criminal investigation midstream, the names of confidential informants, and what they told FBI agents.
Do you see that actually changing, though? I don't see Congress doing anything about that, right?
You know,
that's not the point. The point is we know what has taken place in 2016. We know that there's been an incredible amount of bias from the FBI and the DOJ. Let's not make believe there's business as usual.
Well,
it's not business as usual.
Correct. But there still is an ongoing criminal investigation Congress may not like it, but it's there. Who knows when this Mueller thing is going to be over? But he is still investigating these matters for the DOJ to expose the contents of that investigation. Now, the DOJ will argue, I'm not always a pro-government person, as you know, would impair the investigation. And if you don't believe us, just look at the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure, which Congress wrote, which allow us to keep this stuff secret during the pendency of the investigation.
Every time we have seen redactions and then they were unredacted, it was clear that the reason they were redacted is because they didn't want to embarrass themselves.
Correct.
So we've been down this road before. We've seen the
we
redactions and then the unredactions, and it had zero to do with national security. So that's why I'm like, that's not the point.
That's why it is best for a judge, a neutral judge, to look at this and say, you're not going to redact this because it makes Jim Comey or Andy McCabe look bad. You can only redact it if it's going to impair the investigation or expose a source and expose that person to danger.
The president tweeted about it this morning. I want to tell you what he said. He says the 13 angry Democrats in charge of the Russian witch hunt are starting to find out that there is a court system in place that actually protects people from injustice. And just wait until the courts get to see your unrevealed conflicts of interest.
I think he's probably talking about the argument in court last week before Judge Ellis, who questioned the nature and extent of Mueller's ability to prosecute.
Exactly.
I think that is just a hypothetical argument. Because if Mueller can't prosecute, the federal prosecutors in the Eastern District of Virginia will prosecute. There's plenty of evidence of bank fraud. The only question is who gets to prosecute it.
Right, and that gets the scope issue. It should move to that court if it's not related to the original scope of the
Just
issue,
as the investigation of Michael Cohen moved to the Southern District of New York. Mueller stumbled upon this stuff and said, look, I'm not in New York. This doesn't directly relate to me. You guys handle it.
Yeah. The other thing is interesting that Devin Nunes is saying contempt of Congress charges against Jeff Sessions.
Yes.
But not Rod Rosenstein.
It's very odd.
Because he views Rod Rosenstein as being conflicted.
Correct. But Rod Rosenstein has the authority to say surrender the documents. Jeff Sessions doesn't because he's recused himself.
Right.
But I will tell you that contempt is the way to do it. Not impeachment, as they threatened to do last week. That was a joke. But contempt is the way to do it.
Why?
Because that will force a lawyer to reply. A lawyer who's held in contempt can lose his license to practice.
Got it. Judge, great insights. Thank you. Judge Andrew Napolitano. Back in a minute. No smooth sailing for passengers on a Carnival cruise ship that flooded. Cheryl Casone with the details. Cheryl.
Yeah, Maria, a waterline break flooded 50 rooms aboard a Carnival dream ship. Check out this. A passenger filmed the video as crew members formed a bucket brigade to try to get the water out. Carnival says it took 6 hours to clean up the water and dry off the carpet. About 100 passengers were affected by the flood. They all received full refunds. Royal wedding fever is heating up in the U.S. A bar in Washington, D.C. getting into the spirit to honor Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's wedding on May 19th. People are standing in line to buy a drink at the bar, which calls itself the Royal Wedding Pub. They've even been decorated now inside to resemble St. George's Chapel, where the Prince and Meghan are going to become husband and wife. And everybody is wondering if this little guy is going to be at Prince Harry's wedding. Kate Middleton releasing the first photos of new baby Prince Louis Arthur Charles. His sister Princess Charlotte making an appearance in these pictures as well. These photos were shot just days after Prince Louis's birth. The new prince wearing a hand-me-down, we should say, the same white sweater his big sister wore for her newborn photos. And we've got some new babies of our own that we want to welcome to the Mornings with Maria family. Our producer Cody and his wife Rachel welcomed a baby boy on Saturday, Cormac Harrison Schultz, born at 11:11 p.m., weighing in at 6 pounds 13 ounces. Congratulations, Cody. And then our makeup artist on the show, Brandolyn, and her husband Warren also welcomed a son. Camden Barack Williams was born on April 26th. 7 pounds, 6 ounces. Both families are happy and healthy. Of course, we want to wish them the best. They thought they weren't sleeping on a morning show. They're never going to sleep.
Oh, congratulations to all of them.
Yeah.
And new babies in the Mornings with Maria family. Love it. Beautiful pictures.
That's great. Yeah, and they're prepared for it. If you do this show, you know how to deal with it.
You know how to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Training. Good training. Well, I don't know if it's that easy, but take a break. When we come back, the catcher for the St. Louis Cardinals now out for a month after being hit in the groin following a foul ball. We've got the story and the latest from the NBA and sports next.
We were doing it right. we were coming alive. Yeah, caught up in a southern summer, barefoot blue jean night.
Welcome back. Looks like it'll be the Warriors on the Rockets in the NBA's Western Conference Finals. Jared Max with all the highlights. Jared, good morning.
Good morning. More and more it looks this way. With all due respect to the Pelicans and the Jazz, these results kind of expected. Sunday night hoops in Salt Lake City. Chris Paul peppered the Jazz with 27 points, 12 rebounds. James Harden scored 24. Rockets win 187. They lead the series 3-1. They can close it out tomorrow at home. And it's the same story for the defending champs. The Warriors back at the Golden State. They won Sunday in New Orleans, 118-92. Kevin Durant scored 38. He was inspired by a text message sent from teammate Draymond Green at 4 a.m. Sunday to be who he is. The Warriors can advance to their 4th straight Western Final with a win at home tomorrow. San Antonio Spurs assistant coach Becky Hammon is going to interview for the Milwaukee Bucks head coaching job. Hammon, who's been an assistant in San Antonio for 4 seasons, will become the first woman to interview for an NBA head coaching position. Reportedly, she also interviewed with the Bucks last year for their GM job. And a weekend filled with injuries in Major League Baseball. St. Louis Cardinals all-star catcher Yadier Molina needed emergency surgery on Saturday to repair a traumatic hematoma. Suffered a foul tip hit into his groin area. Molina was hospitalized overnight, returned home yesterday. He is walking around, said to be feeling much better. He's going to be out at least 1 month. Twice in the Stanley Cup playoffs, Brad Marchand tried to get under the skin of opponents by licking their faces. On Friday, Marchand got Tampa Bay's Ryan Callahan after the two had scuffled earlier in the playoffs. He licked the Maple Leafs' Leo Komarov, who in a regular season game got a kiss on the cheek from Marchand, who Saturday met with the NHL and was warned that a potential suspension was waiting for him if he failed to lick his antics. Thankfully for Brad Marchand, doesn't have to worry about it because his team was eliminated from the playoffs yesterday.
I love hockey.
Imagine if Trump licked Mueller's face if he ever had that sit down.
There you go. Good. I'm thinking of Tyson and the biting the ear.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Holyfield.
Stay away from that stuff.
How about the standing for the national anthem? NFL could soon make standing for the national anthem a team choice. Washington Post is reporting that the league is considering giving teams the power to craft their own anthem policies as a compromise. The current league policy recommends but does not require players to stand. What do you think?
Roger Goodell is essentially driving the car. He has the power to make those decisions driving the car. And what he's basically done is said, hey, anybody want to weigh in on this? If you think you're going to get a better result with this, there's no way. There's no way. 32 teams, just because one owner thinks he can get most of his players on board. What if you got one guy who doesn't want to do it? Dumb idea. You either make him do it or you don't, or we just stop talking about it and they stop doing it.
Stop talking about it. That way, that's the only reason why it keeps happening.
Of course.
But this is going to create 32 issues now. It's going to blow up the issue essentially, and it seems like he's sort of abdicating responsibility, right? Like make a call on this.
He doesn't want to get any more flack than he's already got.
He doesn't, but this is actually going to create much more of it, I think. It's going to be a rolling story.
And you also take a national news story and you make it local in all of those local markets, which is really important to those teams. So this is going to be a...
He just wants to be able to say, not my fault. I don't know. They decided.
Right. That's exactly right. I agree with you.
Exactly. And I agree. It sprouts then. You know, now you got one problem.
You've got 32 of them.
All right. We will watch it. Jared, thank you.
Thanks, Maria.
Catch Jared's Sports Reports on Fox News Headlines 24/7 or Sirius Radio XM 115. We'll slip in a quick break. Then oil prices hit their highest level since 2014, fueled by tensions with Iran. This ahead of the deadline for the president to recertify the Iran nuclear deal. That would be on May 12th. That's next hour right here. Mornings with Maria. Stay with us. You're the one that